Hey Internet Wanderer, let's talk about game releases. There's a famous quote in regards to games and their development by Shigeru Miyamoto, even though it's debatable whether or not he even said this, but whatever. The quote goes, "A delayed game is eventually good, a rush game is forever bad." Very insightful, you might say. But that's cringe. I got a better quote for you from my boy Gaben. In the Half-Life 1 documentary, he famously says, "Late is just for a little while. Suck is forever." Your mom lives by that last part of the quote. Delays suck, no matter the context. It's an inconvenience that I'm sure we are all familiar with. Ideally, whenever something is delayed, be it a movie, a TV show, merchandise, an event, or a video game, the best thing you can hope for is that the people working on that product are refining and improving said product. And Valve is a company that absolutely loves refining and improving. They love to take their time when it comes to everything that they do. From making games, the update of said games, how they release their products, everything. In fact, this tendency for Valve to take their time when it comes to their releases has become so prevalent that it actually has a name for it. Valve time. A term that was originally used as a joke, referencing the insane difference between the promised date for content versus the actual release date of the said content. This is so well documented that in Valve's official Wikipedia page, it has a section purely dedicated to Valve time. There's also this page right here that documents every instances of Valve time. I'm not gonna spoil everything right here at the intro of the video, but take a look at some of the horror that awaits you. Dear God, I don't know how these people manage to cope. This is legitimately part of the company's identity. Sure, you could boil this down to essentially being no different than a video game delay. Technically, they are identical. But the difference is in how Valve utilizes these delays to ensure the best possible quality for their products. The absolute insane amount of research and development, playtesting, and experimenting Valve goes through in their creative development process. Valve time is a fancy word for a release delay, sure, but it's so much more than that. So, join me, Internet Wanderer, as I talk about Valve time and how this company, with their delays and their tendency for perfection, has paradoxically become almost a good thing as time went on. How Valve time became a sign that no matter how long it takes Valve to finally release something, rest assured, when it does, the final product will be of something of amazing quality. Hey there, Internet Wanderer. My name is Argonax. I make video reviews, essays, commentaries, and shorts. I hope you enjoy my content enough to do all the YouTube things such as liking and subscribing, and special thanks to all the channel members to who I am extremely grateful for their support. Their contributions mean the world to me, and it helps keep the channel going. If you'll allow me, Internet Wanderer, let's get back to the topic at hand. Valve, as a company, are perfectionists, and thus they want to get everything to the highest level of polish as possible. And more often than not, this results in delays and therefore Valve time. In the worst case, they take so long to research and develop certain projects that sometimes these games are just ultimately dropped, scrapped, or completely cancelled because they took so long. I want to focus on this page as it documents almost all the instances of Valve time. Link below in the video description. It's a great page. So, allow me to showcase some of the, how would I even classify this? The best? The worst? Whatever. Let me showcase you some of the most notable examples of Valve time. Team Fortress 2. The game was supposed to come out in 1999. It ended up coming out in 2007 with a completely different art style and gameplay. I'm showing the trailers here just to see how much the game had diverged from the original plan. Half-Life 2 Episode 3, this was announced back in 2006, and it's still missing. But it's coming any day now, right? Portal 2, a slight delay, nothing too big, and ultimately that delay was well founded as Portal 2 is one of Valve's most beloved and best games of all time. Dota 2, it took 3 years for this game to transition from beta to a full release. And of course, Half-Life Alyx. The grand return to single-player games, the Half-Life franchise, and their debut title into VR. It was released in 2020. Completely unexpected, since everybody had assumed that Valve had given up on the said genre of games. Everything that I just listed there, these are the obvious ones. I want to cover the more wacky examples of Valve time. I'm just gonna react to this as is with no script, just because some of these examples are legitimately fucking hilarious. Some of the more petty ones are like this one, for example. Announcing an update was gonna come out at 11 a.m., but it comes out at 2 p.m. This one, today, and it ended up becoming tonight at 11:49. Just gotta really get as close as possible to the today. It's still technically today, or at least whenever that day came out. I remember this because my buddies were looking so forward to actually playing Counter-Strike Global Offensive when they announced that it was going to go free to play. And they thought it was going to be that day, but yeah, it wasn't until the next day. I tried looking for links to this. I'm assuming it must have been some sort of interview where Valve said that the typical man versus machine match or game mode would last only 30 minutes, but as anyone who's ever played those, if a match lasts 30 minutes, then you're on like some godly team, because those things definitely take longer than 30 minutes on the average. This one is a... They had 3 announcements for the Portal 2 DLC, and they said summer, mid-September, this September. Comes out in October. My god. In fact, I just want to understand how Valve perceives seasons and different months, because this summer, October, later this spring, fall, in 1 hour, in 2 hours. This fall, it comes out in December. Valve really perceives seasons and time of years different from us, don't they? Hey, what's up? Say, did you know that according to the Half-Life developer commentaries, Valve spent weeks just trying to make sure that doors felt correct in VR? Oh, you already knew that? Hey, sorry about that, buddy. I would demonstrate this in Half-Life Alyx, but unfortunately I'm running out of storage space. You know, your mom's nude pics and video files are kind of big. Kinda like your mom. I find it rather funny how Valve time unintentionally bled over to fan projects. For example, Black Mesa took over 15 years to get its final release. It was worth it though, game's amazing. Valve can do most of these game delays since they are a private company, and therefore they don't have any investors to disappoint with failed deadlines. Instead, they have fans to disappoint with failed deadlines. As you scroll down in this page, you'll see that eventually there's a new category called Reverse Valve Time. In other words, it's just whenever Valve decides to release something a little earlier than expected. So Valve Time is when something is delayed, Reverse Valve Time is when something gets released early. But I propose another, new, smaller category, Anti-Valve Time. Or, in other words, games or projects that Valve rushed, or rather made extremely quickly. There are 2 notable examples of this, DOTA Underlords and Left 4 Dead 2. And these 2 games fall in the extreme ends of this anti-Valve time. You see, Left 4 Dead 2 is one of the fastest sequels that Valve has ever made. It's actually rather astounding how they went from making Left 4 Dead 1 straight into making Left 4 Dead 2 in such a small amount of time. And what's even more impressive is the fact that Left 4 Dead 2 is such an improvement over its original that most people see it as the definitive Left 4 Dead experience. In fact, all of Left 4 Dead 1's content has been ported officially into Left 4 Dead 2, so technically speaking there is no reason to play the first game. Not saying that Left 4 Dead 1 is bad by any means, absolutely not, it's a masterpiece in its own right. But I legitimately want to ask you, dear viewer, if you still play Left 4 Dead 1 and you prefer it over Left 4 Dead 2, why? I'm genuinely curious. Please comment down below, I would love to know why. That's an example of good anti-Valve time. But what's an example of bad anti-Valve time? Unfortunately, and as it pains me to say this, Dota Underlords. I love playing this game. It's a damn shame what ended up happening to it. You see, the reason that this game exists was because back in the late 2010s, early 2020s, auto battlers were on the rise, and Valve wanted to capitalize on this. They tried hiring the original developers, but they declined, so Valve ended up making their own game by themselves. And for one reason or another, I can't really say why, Underlords just didn't really achieve the level of success that Valve was hoping. Maybe it's a combination of the genre being more of a fad than anything else, and maybe it was just the lack of support that Underlords got. I covered Underlords in a previous video of mine, but in that video, I do state that this game was developed rather quickly, and then when it was finally released, it was only officially supported by Valve for a very short amount of time. The last major update for Dota Underlords was in August of 2020. For those in the audience keeping track of the dates, Dota Underlords was officially released in February of 2020. The last game update was in August that year. That is 6 months of official support. If you want to be generous and include the early access period, that's 14 months. If that doesn't describe a game being short-lived, I don't know what does. So for all my talk about Valve time and Valve's propensity for perfection and taking their time, they're not immune to it. There has been times where Valve definitely rushes projects, for better and for worse. I also pulled up Google Trends just to gauge the interest of the term Valve time, and as you can see here, the term has steadily gone up as the years went by. It does seem like it's also going up as the interest of Valve games goes up as well. Maybe as people learn more and more about Valve's prestige and the fact that they're actually making more games again, maybe people are looking up Valve and Valve time more and more. I'm hoping it's that and not just because people are Googling Valve time, the term used in internal combustion engines. So you might ask yourself, what exactly does Valve do with all this delayed Valve time? How exactly do they use it to refine their projects? I think the best example is how Valve approaches playtesting. Anytime Valve wants to test something, whether it be a gameplay mechanic, a level, a weapon, a vehicle, a mechanic, it doesn't matter. If Valve wants to test something, they will call a playtester, load up the level. However, they do not say a word to the playtester. They simply watch the playtester do their thing, fiddle around in the level, while they note every little thing that happens. If they wanted to test a certain physics puzzle, they'll load up the level and simply watch the playtester do their thing. They won't say a single word because they want to make sure that the puzzle or any mechanic of the game is easy to understand and is intuitive. I will show you a short clip of Valve demonstrating the steps that they needed to take when it came to moving in a VR space.
During these early experiments, two things became pretty clear to us. First, players have a strong tendency to focus on the destination, and the rest of their environment is seen as a potential obstacle to them getting where they want to go. Second, players imagine themselves to have superhuman speed and agility. Playtesters would happily tell us that yes, in fact, they could reach that spot by squeezing through a gap, or catapulting over an object, or sliding under an obstacle. Ultimately, our initial tests and playtesters' desires led us to the system we have today, the main goals of which are to ensure that the end player position is a valid place for the player's body and that the path to get there is viable. To get to this point, we had to solve a whole variety of problems. Some of the more interesting ones are things like how player height has an impact on pathing. Also, building player trust in the system and keeping players grounded in the world just using audio.
There should be no need for exposition. And if Valve sees an aspect that is good, they will either refine it and keep it. But if they deem that something is bad, they will try to fix it, overhaul it, or in the worst case, scrap it completely. And keep in mind, this applies to everything Valve makes, from weapons to vehicles to puzzles to levels to maps to entire games. Valve is very much the type of company to work on a game up to completion and scrap it at the last moment just because they deem it not good enough. This has happened multiple times, especially with Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2. These two games went through so many different versions and overhauls that there's entire YouTube videos and documentaries chronicling these older versions of these games. Coincidentally, that's also the reason why these games got delayed so many times. This is the level of refining that I'm talking about. Hours upon hours, days upon days of playtesting every little thing. They'll load up a level, watch the playtester do their thing, take notes, work on it, refine it, call the playtester back, and do it all over again. Repeat ad nauseum. And I completely understand that this is something that other companies do, but I assure you, the level of intricacy and meticulousness that other game companies is nowhere near Valve. If perfectionists had a final boss, it would be Valve.
More than 2 people and less than 4.
So are you getting a lot of death threats over the non-reveal of Half-Life 3 yet?
I think everybody hopes that we do good work in the future.
I might cover this next topic more in depth in another video, maybe, but I want to briefly talk about how Valve tutorializes their games. I remember playing Doom Eternal a while back, and I very much enjoy the game, especially early on, but I swear, the momentum of this game was completely killed anytime that they wanted to teach me something, because they would jump scare you with these text walls. Anytime a new mechanic showed up, they legitimately had to pause gameplay, bring you into another room, bombard you with wall of text, and literally put you through a simulation just to make sure that you understand the new gameplay mechanic. Sure, it's very thorough, but seamless it is not. It's also very jarring. Whereas Valve, with their extreme level of playtesting, is able to integrate these seamless game tutorials that most of the time players might not even realize are game tutorials. For example, in Half-Life 2, at the beginning of the game, when the Metro Cop does the famous
Let me read you a letter I recently received. Why has the C-56...
Sure, in-game it just looks like the cop is being an asshole to you. I mean, he is being an asshole to you. But when he asks you to pick up the can and throw it in the trash can, it is the game's way of subtly teaching you that, hey, physics is a thing in this game. It's subtle, it's seamless, and if done well, you might not even realize that you just got taught something. It also does a good job of fleshing out the world, even if just by a little bit, showing that the citizens get regularly abused by these Metro Cops. It accomplishes so much with so little. Even when Half-Life 2 is trying to overtly tutorialize something, like for example, Alex teaching you how to use the gravity gun.
The primary trigger emits a charge. You can punch stuff and send it flying. I found it handy for clearing minefields.
The game still makes sure that it's believable and seamless within the gameplay, since the game tries to frame it that you are playing catch with dog. It teaches you a new gameplay mechanic, makes sure that you are doing it in a safe, controlled environment without any enemies, and it also does the great job of introducing you to new characters. So much done with so little, and all of this can only be done with the insane level of playtesting that Valve does. You'll come to realize that Valve time is a practice that Valve has done more or less since the start of the company, and it shows. Half-Life 1, their debut game, a titan of the gaming world, but back then, they weren't so sure about that. As an example, according to the Half-Life 1 documentary, they sent a photographer to New Mexico to take photo references for the game, which was going to be used for concept arts and for textures within the game. This is commonplace nowadays, even for small indie companies and indie games. But back then, in the 90s, for a debut game for a brand new company, that's some pioneering stuff.
You get past Ellensburg and it's high desert, so I spent a lot of time out there getting reference. Most of the reference came from Eastern Washington. I did a drive out to the Columbia Gorge and took a lot of photos, and also a lot of just reference imagery of just like, hey, this is what desert looks like, and big cliffs and stuff like that. That drive was 2 days. It was 8 hours down, 8 hours back, and I'm not even sure I spent the night. I must have spent the night down there. So while it was definitely made for the Southwest, the local reference was out in the Columbia Gorge.
And in an odd twist of that anti-Valve time that I was talking about earlier, it's rather funny because Half-Life 1 was delayed quite a few times. Valve needed to refine and overhaul several aspects of the game. But Half-Life 1 is still seen as a triumph of gaming, back then and even now. However, it's also well known that the last few levels of Half-Life 1 were rushed and don't necessarily have the same amount of polish as the rest of the game. So even back then, they had examples of Valve time and anti-Valve time, I guess. However, now, because Valve is their own publisher, they can take their time with everything that they want to do. It's great for them, it's bad for us gamers though, especially if the company in question is this much of a perfectionist. Hey look, I finally reinstalled Half-Life Alyx. Say, I've heard a lot of rumors that apparently they were gonna add fast headcrabs to this game, but they were removed because allegedly they were too scary for playtesters. In my opinion, bad call, Valve, bad call. In fact, the sentiment I seem to get is that they had to tone back the horror aspects of Half-Life Alyx because too many playtesters were finding it a bit too overwhelming. In other words, this incredibly terrifying game is watered down.
This is fine.
Valve does a good job of documenting their creative process with their developer commentaries. It's something that they do for all of their modern games. I would highly recommend listening to them. They offer great insight as to how Valve approaches their creative process when it comes to making their games. For the sake of simplicity, I will showcase just one audio entry. Developer commentary number 3 of Half-Life Alyx. This specific commentary is just talking about the first 10 seconds of Half-Life Alyx's gameplay. That's how you know a company is a perfectionist, when so much thought and consideration went into the first 10 seconds of the game starting up. I'll let the commentary explain itself, but the only context that you will need to know is, when you start the game and press play, you load into a white void loading screen, text appears to give some exposition and context, and then the player's vision fades into a rooftop balcony overlooking City 17 with the Citadel in the distance. That's it, that's how the game starts. Okay, here we go.
One of the pieces of important information we struggled to convey was exactly when Half-Life Alyx is set within the series timeline. Whilst we tried to reflect it carefully in many of the world details, it was never 100% successful during playtests. Eventually, we decided it was too important to be left to the players to figure out, and so we put it in our opening text crawl. The Citadel's incomplete state did provide us with an early opportunity to reinforce the timeline visually. Half-Life Alyx takes place 5 years before the events of Half-Life 2, in which the towering Citadel represents the Combine seat of power. As we see here, however, early Combine infrastructure is a cluttered mess of cables and unusual structures sprawled all over the city, surrounding the Citadel's construction, and served as a useful indicator of the time frame. Large, sweeping vistas such as this one proved an interesting challenge in virtual reality. Their distance from the viewer means they don't benefit from stereoscopic vision the way that small close-up objects do. Because of this, the small objects on the balcony often draw the attention of the players before they've even noticed the imposing structure in the distance. If we moved the Citadel too close, it felt absurdly huge and difficult to take in. Yet placed alone on the horizon, it felt two-dimensional and flat. We found the solution in filling the space between the viewer and the distant structure with many scale references. The city itself, huge supply cables leading towards the vanishing point, large repeated Combine buildings, heavy pollution fog, careful lighting, and all the animated elements, especially the helicopter whose sound begins in the fade-in. All these were carefully composed to help draw the attention of the player to the Citadel first, before letting their attention wander to take in the details of the city, and settle ultimately on the inviting items here on the balcony.
Valve time doesn't mean laziness. Ideally. It also implies that the company is giving their 100% at all times. But let's be real, they aren't always doing that. Maybe in the early days of the company, back when they were making Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2, but since nowadays money isn't really much of an issue because they have the money printer that is Steam, Dota, and Counter-Strike, they aren't really incentivized to work too hard. But I would argue that their laziest time was back in the early to mid-2010s, their esports era in other words. But nowadays, it does feel like they're getting back into the groove of making games again, and their laziest days seemingly are behind them. I hope.
Hi, I'm Gabe Newell.
I mentioned that Gaben quote at the start of the video, but honestly, I think the full context of that quote might be able to give you guys a better explanation with Valve's whole ideology to perfection.
But I remember one moment, he turned around, he was like this with his hair, he's going, we're gonna fail, we're gonna fail, we're gonna fail, we're gonna fail, we're gonna fail. And I was just like, it blew me away. I was like, oh shit, this isn't good.
You know, we were doing our best trying to make this game and the story, and you know, we had a schedule from Sierra, and it was a tight schedule. And we told them, like, we're not going to ship this, and we realized that you're not going to pay us to continue developing this, but we're going to do it anyway.
Late is just for a little while, suck is forever, right? We could try to force this thing out the door, but that's not the company we want to be. That's not the people we want to be. That's not the relationship we want to have with our customers.
So, Internet Wanderer, I have one more question for you. Is this level of perfectionism justified? Is it really okay to have things delayed by a few months, but then those months turn to years, and those years turn to decades? Is it really worth it? It's hard to answer this question. I honestly don't know. That's why I'll leave it up to you, Internet Wanderer. Do you think Valve time is a good thing, a bad thing, or just something to laugh in retrospect? Write your thoughts in the comment section down below. That's gonna be it for me, Internet Wanderer. Thanks for watching. Do the YouTube things.